Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a real estate licensee in Arizona is preparing a listing advertisement that includes professional photography and videography, including drone footage and a virtual tour. Which of the following approaches best balances marketing effectiveness with regulatory compliance under Arizona law? Option A. The licensee focuses the videography on the property's best angles and omits any shots that might reveal minor imperfections or potential issues, such as a slightly overgrown garden or a visible crack in the driveway. Option B. The licensee ensures all visual content accurately represents the property's current condition and includes clear, prominent disclosures for any material facts that might be visually inferred or are legally required to be disclosed in advertising. Option C. The licensee uses advanced digital editing techniques to enhance the property's features, making it appear larger and more aesthetically pleasing than it actually is, to attract more potential buyers. Option D. The licensee prioritizes showcasing the property's potential through aspirational imagery and virtual staging, without explicitly stating that these are enhancements or that the property may require significant repairs. The correct answer is B. The licensee ensures all visual content accurately represents the property's current condition and includes clear, prominent disclosures for any material facts that might be visually inferred or are legally required to be disclosed in advertising. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that while high-quality photography and videography can enhance property appeal, strict adherence to Arizona's advertising regulations is paramount to avoid legal repercussions and maintain professional integrity. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing marketing effectiveness with legal compliance, specifically concerning disclosures and representations made in advertising materials. A licensee must ensure that visual media accurately portrays the property and does not mislead potential buyers or renters. The best approach involves ensuring all visual content, including drone footage and virtual tours, is truthful and not misleading, and that any required disclosures are prominently displayed or clearly referenced within the advertisement. This aligns with Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32, Chapter 15, which governs real estate transactions and advertising. Specifically, ARS Section 32-2152 prohibits false or misleading advertising by licensees. Ethical considerations also demand transparency and honesty in all dealings. An approach that uses digitally enhanced images to significantly alter the appearance of a property, making it seem larger or more appealing than it is in reality, is ethically problematic and violates the spirit of ARS Section 32-2152 by creating a misleading representation. Similarly, omitting crucial information about significant property defects that are visually apparent in the footage, such as a visibly damaged roof or foundation issues, constitutes a failure to disclose material facts, which is a violation of Arizona real estate law and professional ethics. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on aesthetic appeal without considering the accuracy of the portrayal or the inclusion of necessary disclosures fails to meet the legal and ethical standards required of a licensed real estate professional in Arizona. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough review of all advertising content, including visual media, against Arizona's advertising statutes and the Arizona Department of Real Estate's guidelines. Before publishing any advertisement, licensees should ask, does this visual accurately represent the property? Are there any material facts that should be disclosed, and if so, how will they be communicated? Is this advertisement likely to mislead a reasonable consumer? Question 2. Investigation of a client's financial situation reveals they are a first-time homebuyer in Arizona with a moderate income and a desire for the lowest possible initial monthly payment. The licensee is aware that adjustable-rate mortgages and interest-only mortgages can offer lower initial payments compared to traditional fixed-rate mortgages. What is the most ethical and professionally responsible course of action for the licensee? Option A. Explain the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing the long-term implications and risks of each, and advise the client to consult with a qualified mortgage broker or lender to determine the best fit for their specific financial circumstances and risk tolerance. Option B. Focus on presenting the interest-only mortgage option emphasizing its significantly lower initial monthly payment, and downplay the fact that the principal balance will not decrease during the interest-only period. Option C. Recommend an adjustable rate mortgage, highlighting its lower initial payment, and suggest that interest rates are likely to decrease in the future, making it a financially advantageous choice. Option D. Advise the client to choose the mortgage product that offers the highest commission to the licensee, as this indicates a more complex and potentially beneficial loan structure for the buyer. The correct answer is A. Explain the fundamental differences between fixed rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing the long-term implications and risks of each, and advise the client to consult with a qualified mortgage broker or lender to determine the best fit for their specific financial circumstances and risk tolerance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to balance their fiduciary duty to a client with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and unbiased information about complex financial products. The licensee must avoid steering a client towards a product that may not be in their best interest, even if it offers a higher commission. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client's financial well-being and understanding are prioritized. The best approach involves thoroughly explaining the fundamental differences between fixed rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages, focusing on the long-term implications and risks associated with each, particularly for a first-time homebuyer. This includes detailing how interest rate fluctuations affect payments on an adjustable rate mortgage and the potential for principal to increase if only interest is paid on an interest-only loan. The licensee should then guide the client to consult with a qualified mortgage broker or lender to explore specific loan products that align with their financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals. This aligns with Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32, Chapter 20, which mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients, and not misrepresent or conceal material facts. Providing comprehensive, unbiased information and facilitating expert consultation upholds these principles. An approach that focuses solely on presenting the lowest initial payment option without fully disclosing the potential for future payment increases or the long-term cost implications of an adjustable rate mortgage or an interest-only loan is ethically flawed. This misrepresents the true cost and risk of the loan, potentially leading the client to make a decision they cannot afford long-term. This violates the duty of full disclosure and could be construed as steering, which is prohibited. Another unacceptable approach is to recommend a specific type of mortgage, such as an adjustable rate mortgage, based on the licensee's personal belief that interest rates will decrease, without adequately informing the client of the significant risk that rates could increase, leading to unaffordable payments. This constitutes providing financial advice beyond the scope of a real estate license and exposes the client to undue risk without proper disclosure. Finally, an approach that emphasizes the potential for higher commission associated with a particular mortgage product, rather than the client's best interests, is a clear ethical violation. This prioritizes the licensee's financial gain over the client's well-being and is contrary to the fiduciary duties owed to the client. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance. They should then provide clear, unbiased information about available mortgage types, highlighting the pros and cons of each in relation to the client's profile. The next step is to encourage the client to seek professional advice from mortgage lenders or brokers who can offer specific product details and pre-approvals. The licensee's role is to facilitate an informed decision, not to make the financial decision for the client. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that understanding lease agreements is crucial for protecting tenant rights. In Arizona, a prospective tenant expresses concern about their job security and asks if they can sign a lease agreement for only 6 months, stating they would prefer a month-to-month arrangement thereafter. As a licensed real estate salesperson in Arizona, what is the most professional and ethically sound approach to this situation? Option A. Advise the tenant that a verbal agreement for a 6-month lease followed by a month-to-month arrangement is acceptable and common practice in Arizona. Option B. Immediately agree to the tenant's request for a 6-month lease and assure them that a month-to-month arrangement can be easily transitioned afterward without detailing potential drawbacks. Option C. Explain the standard terms and conditions of a typical Arizona residential lease agreement, including the implications of a shorter lease term versus a longer one, and the potential financial consequences of early termination, allowing the tenant to make an informed decision. Option D. Tell the tenant that they can break any lease agreement at any time without penalty if their job situation changes, as long as they give notice. The correct answer is C. Explain the standard terms and conditions of a typical Arizona residential lease agreement, including the implications of a shorter lease term versus a longer one, and the potential financial consequences of early termination, allowing the tenant to make an informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a situation where a client's immediate financial needs might conflict with the long-term best interests and legal obligations associated with a lease agreement. The licensee must balance client advocacy with adherence to Arizona revised statutes governing lease agreements and fair housing principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties understand their rights and responsibilities, and that the agreement is legally sound and ethically executed. The best approach involves clearly explaining the standard terms and conditions of a typical Arizona residential lease agreement to the prospective tenant, including the implications of a shorter lease term versus a longer one, and the potential financial consequences of early termination. This includes detailing the security deposit requirements, rent payment schedule, late fees as permitted by Arizona law, and the tenant's responsibilities for utilities and maintenance. The licensee should then allow the prospective tenant to make an informed decision based on this clear and accurate information, without pressuring them into a specific term. This aligns with the Arizona Department of Real Estate's mandate for licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to provide clients with accurate information regarding real estate transactions, including lease agreements. It upholds the ethical duty to represent the client's best interest by ensuring they fully understand the terms they are agreeing to, thereby preventing future disputes and potential legal issues. An incorrect approach would be to immediately agree to the tenant's request for a month-to-month lease without fully explaining the potential drawbacks and the standard practices in Arizona. This could lead to the tenant being unaware of higher rental rates, lack of stability, or increased landlord discretion in terminating the tenancy, which might not be in their long-term best interest. This fails to meet the licensee's duty of full disclosure and could be construed as steering the client towards a less advantageous arrangement without proper counsel. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest that the landlord would likely accept a verbal agreement for a short-term lease, bypassing the need for a written lease. Arizona law requires lease agreements to be in writing to be enforceable, especially for terms exceeding 1 year. Relying on verbal agreements is legally precarious and exposes both parties to significant risk and potential disputes. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of fundamental real estate law and a failure to uphold professional standards. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the tenant that they can simply break the lease at any time without penalty, regardless of the lease terms. While some lease agreements may include early termination clauses, these often come with financial penalties. Advising a tenant that they can unilaterally terminate without consequence is misleading, unethical, and potentially exposes the licensee to liability for misrepresentation. It fails to educate the tenant on their contractual obligations and the legal ramifications of breaching a lease. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves thoroughly understanding the relevant Arizona statutes and common practices for lease agreements, clearly communicating all material terms and conditions to the client, and allowing the client to make decisions based on complete and accurate information. When faced with a client's specific requests, the professional's role is to explain the implications of those requests within the legal and ethical framework, rather than simply agreeing to them without due diligence. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that a prospective buyer in Arizona, working with a licensed real estate salesperson, expresses concern about their ability to afford a higher monthly mortgage payment, even though they are pre-approved for a loan. The buyer indicates a strong preference for the lowest possible monthly payment. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the salesperson to take in this situation? Option A. Recommend a specific loan product that offers the lowest initial monthly payment, emphasizing its affordability without fully disclosing the potential for future rate adjustments or other long-term financial impacts. Option B. Advise the buyer that financing is their responsibility and that the salesperson cannot provide guidance on specific loan products or their implications, leaving the buyer to research all options independently. Option C. Thoroughly explain the various financing options available, detailing the long-term implications, risks, and benefits of each, and assist the buyer in exploring options that align with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, ensuring they understand the consequences of their choices. Option D. Focus exclusively on finding the loan product with the absolute lowest monthly payment, without extensively detailing the associated risks or potential for future payment increases. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly explain the various financing options available, detailing the long-term implications, risks, and benefits of each, and assist the buyer in exploring options that align with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, ensuring they understand the consequences of their choices. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the licensee to navigate a situation where a client's financial limitations might conflict with the licensee's fiduciary duty to secure the best possible financing terms. The licensee must balance the client's immediate affordability concerns with the long-term implications of a loan that might be disadvantageous. Careful judgment is required to avoid steering the client towards a loan that, while seemingly affordable now, could lead to future financial distress or violate disclosure obligations. The best professional approach involves proactively educating the client about the full spectrum of available financing options, including their respective risks and benefits, and clearly explaining the potential long-term consequences of each. This includes discussing interest rates, loan terms, potential for future payment increases, e.g., adjustable rate mortgages, and the impact of different down payment amounts on monthly payments and overall loan costs. The licensee should then assist the client in exploring options that align with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, while also ensuring the client understands the implications of their choices. This approach upholds the licensee's fiduciary duty by prioritizing the client's informed decision-making and long-term financial well-being, consistent with Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32, Chapter 20, which governs real estate transactions and mandates fair dealing and disclosure. An approach that focuses solely on finding the lowest possible monthly payment without thoroughly explaining the associated risks and long-term costs is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a client choosing a loan product that is unsustainable in the long run, potentially violating the duty of care and good faith owed to the client under Arizona real estate law. Furthermore, failing to disclose the full implications of loan terms, such as potential future payment increases on an adjustable rate mortgage, constitutes a failure of disclosure and could be considered deceptive practice. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to pressure the client into accepting a specific loan product that may not be in their best interest, even if it appears to meet their immediate affordability needs. This could be driven by the licensee's desire for a quick sale or a commission, and it directly contravenes the fiduciary duty to act solely in the client's best interest. Such actions could lead to violations of Arizona's Consumer Protection Act and the Arizona Department of Real Estate's regulations concerning ethical conduct. Finally, an approach that avoids discussing financing options altogether and leaves the client to navigate the complex world of mortgages independently is also professionally deficient. While the client ultimately makes the decision, the real estate licensee has a responsibility to provide guidance and information to facilitate an informed choice, especially when it directly impacts the success of the real estate transaction and the client's financial future. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's financial situation and goals. They should then act as educators and facilitators, presenting a range of suitable options with clear explanations of pros and cons, and empowering the client to make a well-informed decision. Transparency, honesty, and a commitment to the client's best interests, as mandated by Arizona real estate licensing laws, should guide every step. Question 5. During a real estate transaction in Arizona, a buyer expresses excitement about a property and asks their real estate salesperson to confirm that the interest rate and closing costs detailed in the initial loan estimate provided by the lender are final and will not change. The salesperson, eager to close the sale, is tempted to reassure the buyer that these figures are locked in. What is the most professional and ethically sound course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Advise the buyer to focus primarily on the purchase price and the property itself, suggesting that the loan estimate details are less important at this stage. Option B. Clearly explain to the buyer that the initial loan estimate is a preliminary document and that the final interest rate and fees will be determined after the lender's full underwriting process, managing their expectations about potential changes. Option C. Tell the buyer that they can likely negotiate a significantly lower interest rate and fewer fees after the property appraisal is completed. Option D. Assure the buyer that the interest rate and closing costs on the loan estimate are final and will not change, as this is what the lender has provided. The correct answer is B. Clearly explain to the buyer that the initial loan estimate is a preliminary document and that the final interest rate and fees will be determined after the lender's full underwriting process, managing their expectations about potential changes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical challenge in the mortgage application process where a real estate salesperson might be tempted to overlook or downplay crucial information to secure a sale. The pressure to close a deal can conflict with the duty to ensure the client fully understands their financial obligations and the risks involved. Professional judgment is required to prioritize the client's best interests and adhere to regulatory requirements over immediate personal gain. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and comprehensively explaining to the buyer that the initial loan estimate is subject to change and that the final loan terms, including interest rate and fees, will be confirmed after a full underwriting process. This approach ensures transparency and manages the buyer's expectations accurately, aligning with the ethical obligation to provide truthful and complete information. Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32, Chapter 20, Article 7, specifically regarding the duties of real estate licensees, mandates honesty and fair dealing with all parties in a transaction. Furthermore, ethical guidelines for real estate professionals emphasize avoiding misrepresentation and ensuring clients are fully informed. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assure the buyer that the initial loan estimate is the final offer and that the interest rate and fees will not change. This constitutes misrepresentation, violating Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32, Chapter 20, Article 7, which prohibits licensees from making false promises or representations. It also breaches the ethical duty of honesty and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach is to advise the buyer to disregard the loan estimate and focus solely on the purchase price, suggesting that loan details are secondary. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and potentially leads the buyer into a financial commitment they do not fully understand or can afford, failing to uphold the fiduciary duty of care and competence expected of a licensed professional. A third incorrect approach is to suggest that the buyer can negotiate the interest rate and fees significantly after the appraisal, implying a level of control that may not be realistic or guaranteed. This can create false hope and mislead the buyer about the predictability of their mortgage terms, which is a form of misrepresentation and unprofessional conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency and accuracy in all communications, especially concerning financial commitments. When faced with situations where initial estimates might differ from final terms, the professional decision-making process involves 1. Identifying the potential for misunderstanding or misrepresentation. 2. Recalling and applying relevant state statutes and ethical codes that govern professional conduct. 3. Communicating all material information clearly and comprehensively to the client, managing expectations realistically. 4. Seeking clarification from lenders or mortgage professionals if unsure about specific terms or processes. 5. Always acting in the client's best interest, even if it means delaying or potentially jeopardizing a sale due to a lack of client understanding or financial readiness. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that an Arizona real estate salesperson is working with a buyer who, after signing a standard Arizona Association of Realtors registered purchase agreement, with no specific contingencies allowing for termination, wishes to withdraw from the transaction due to a sudden and unexpected job loss. The salesperson needs to advise the buyer on how to proceed. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional and regulatory compliance in Arizona? Option A. Advise the buyer that they must proceed with the purchase to avoid legal action, regardless of their personal hardship, and that the salesperson will handle all negotiations to ensure the sale closes. Option B. Instruct the buyer that the earnest money deposit will be forfeited to the seller as per the salesperson's discretion, as the buyer is clearly in breach. Option C. Advise the buyer on the terms of the executed purchase agreement regarding default and earnest money, explain the potential legal consequences of breach of contract under Arizona law, and recommend the buyer seek independent legal counsel to understand their rights and obligations, while facilitating communication between buyer and seller to explore mutually agreeable resolutions. Option D. Inform the buyer that they can simply withdraw from the contract without any repercussions, as personal circumstances often allow for termination. The correct answer is C. Advise the buyer on the terms of the executed purchase agreement regarding default and earnest money. Explain the potential legal consequences of breach of contract under Arizona law, and recommend the buyer seek independent legal counsel to understand their rights and obligations, while facilitating communication between buyer and seller to explore mutually agreeable resolutions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate transactions where a buyer, after signing a purchase agreement, attempts to withdraw due to unforeseen personal circumstances. The professional challenge lies in navigating the contractual obligations while acknowledging the buyer's situation, ensuring compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes, (ARS), regarding real estate contracts and agency duties, and avoiding potential legal disputes or ethical breaches. The agent must balance the seller's rights under the contract with the buyer's desire to terminate and their own fiduciary responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves advising the buyer on the terms of the executed purchase agreement and the potential legal ramifications of breach of contract under Arizona law. This includes clearly explaining the earnest money deposit's disposition as stipulated in the contract and ARS Section 32-2151.01, which governs earnest money handling. The agent should facilitate communication between the buyer and seller to explore mutually agreeable solutions, such as a negotiated release or forfeiture of the earnest money, or a renegotiation of terms, always acting within the scope of their agency agreement, and ARS Section 32-2151. The agent must remain neutral and avoid giving legal advice, instead recommending the buyer seek independent legal counsel to understand their rights and obligations. This approach upholds contractual integrity, respects the parties' autonomy, and adheres to ethical standards by providing accurate information and facilitating resolution without overstepping professional boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the buyer that they can simply withdraw without consequence, regardless of the contract's terms, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This disregards the binding nature of a real estate purchase agreement in Arizona and ARS Section 32-2151.01, which outlines procedures for earnest money. Such advice could lead to a breach of contract claim against the buyer and potential liability for the agent, suggesting the agent can unilaterally decide the fate of the earnest money deposit without adhering to the contract or ARS Section 32-2151.01 is also incorrect. The agent is a fiduciary and cannot make unilateral decisions regarding contract terms or escrow funds. These matters require agreement between the buyer and seller or a court order. Furthermore, pressuring the buyer to proceed with the purchase against their will, despite their stated personal hardship, is ethically questionable and may violate agency duties of loyalty and good faith, potentially leading to disputes and damage to the agent's reputation and license. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly reviewing the executed purchase agreement to understand the specific terms related to contingencies, default, and earnest money. They must then consult Arizona Revised Statutes, particularly those concerning real estate transactions and agency relationships, e.g., ARS Section 32-2151, ARS Section 32-2151.01. The agent's role is to facilitate communication and provide factual information about the contract and relevant laws, not to offer legal opinions or make decisions for the parties. When a party expresses a desire to terminate, the agent should explain the contractual consequences and encourage the party to seek legal advice. The goal is to guide the parties toward a resolution that is both legally sound and ethically responsible, respecting the contractual commitments and the parties' rights. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates that a real estate salesperson in Arizona is presented with a property that includes a large tract of undeveloped land, several outbuildings, and a small, older farmhouse. The client expresses interest in potentially developing the land for a vineyard and selling it as an agricultural enterprise, but also mentions the possibility of subdividing it for residential lots. Which of the following approaches best reflects the salesperson's professional responsibility in advising the client regarding the property's classification and potential sale under Arizona law? Option A. Categorize the property broadly as undeveloped land and provide general advice applicable to any land sale in Arizona, without delving into the specific regulatory nuances of agricultural or residential classifications. Option B. Focus on the outbuildings and suggest marketing the property as a commercial or industrial site, as these structures might indicate a non-residential use, and postpone detailed investigation into agricultural or residential zoning. Option C. Advise the client that the property is primarily residential due to the presence of the farmhouse, and proceed with marketing it as a potential residential subdivision, deferring any discussion of agricultural potential until a later stage. Option D. Accurately classify the property based on its primary intended use as an agricultural enterprise, considering Arizona's specific regulations for agricultural land, and advise the client on the implications of pursuing this classification, including potential zoning, water rights, and tax considerations. The correct answer is D. Accurately classify the property based on its primary intended use as an agricultural enterprise, considering Arizona's specific regulations for agricultural land, and advise the client on the implications of pursuing this classification, including potential zoning, water rights, and tax considerations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson to accurately identify and advise on the distinct legal and regulatory implications of different property types within Arizona. Mischaracterizing a property can lead to significant legal liabilities, financial losses for clients, and disciplinary action from the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes, (ARS), and to uphold fiduciary duties. The best professional approach involves accurately classifying the property based on its primary use and characteristics, and then advising the client on the specific considerations relevant to that classification under Arizona law. This includes understanding zoning, potential environmental regulations, financing options, and disclosure requirements unique to residential, commercial, industrial, or agricultural properties in Arizona. For example, an agricultural property in Arizona may have specific water rights, land use restrictions, or tax implications that differ significantly from a residential or commercial property. This approach ensures that the client receives informed advice tailored to the property's actual nature and the applicable legal framework, thereby fulfilling the salesperson's duty of care and competence as mandated by ARS Title 32, Chapter 20. An incorrect approach would be to broadly categorize the property based on superficial similarities, without a thorough understanding of its primary intended use and the specific Arizona regulations governing it. For instance, assuming a large parcel of land with some existing structures is purely residential, without investigating potential agricultural zoning or industrial uses, would be a failure to exercise due diligence. This could lead to advising a client on residential financing or marketing strategies that are inappropriate or illegal for the property's actual classification, violating ARS Section 32-2153 regarding fraudulent representations. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the most familiar property type to the salesperson, regardless of the property's actual characteristics. If a salesperson is more comfortable with residential sales, they might attempt to market a property with significant industrial infrastructure as a large residential lot, without considering the environmental regulations, zoning ordinances, or specialized buyer pools associated with industrial properties in Arizona. This demonstrates a lack of competence and a failure to act in the client's best interest, potentially leading to violations of ARS Section 32-2154 concerning dishonest dealings. A further incorrect approach would be to provide advice that is not grounded in the specific legal and regulatory framework of Arizona for real estate transactions. This might involve referencing general real estate principles without considering how Arizona law, such as ARS Title 32, Chapter 20, or specific county and municipal ordinances, dictates the classification and sale of different property types. Failing to adhere to these specific jurisdictional requirements constitutes a breach of professional duty and can result in legal repercussions. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a comprehensive assessment of the property's physical characteristics and its current or intended primary use. This should be followed by research into applicable zoning laws, ARS provisions, and any relevant local ordinances that define and regulate that specific property type within Arizona. The salesperson must then use this information to provide accurate, informed advice to the client, ensuring all disclosures and marketing efforts align with the property's correct classification and the governing regulatory landscape. Question 8. Consider a scenario where a property manager in Arizona receives a request from a tenant for a significant plumbing repair that is not an emergency, but is necessary to prevent potential water damage. The property manager has a preferred plumbing vendor with whom they have a long-standing professional relationship, but the cost of the repair will exceed the owner's pre-approved spending limit for routine maintenance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the property manager to take? Option A. Inform the tenant that the owner must approve all repairs directly and that the manager cannot authorize anything beyond minor fixes. Option B. Delay the repair until the manager can find a vendor who charges less than the owner's pre-approved spending limit, even if it means waiting several days. Option C. Immediately authorize the repair using the owner's funds, as the manager is responsible for ensuring the property is maintained. Option D. Obtain written approval from the owner for the repair, detailing the estimated cost and the proposed vendor before authorizing the work. The correct answer is D. Obtain written approval from the owner for the repair, detailing the estimated cost and the proposed vendor before authorizing the work. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a property manager to navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain fiduciary duties to both the owner and the tenant, while adhering to Arizona revised statutes governing property management. The manager must ensure transparency and avoid actions that could be perceived as self-dealing or detrimental to the owner's interests. Careful judgment is required to balance the immediate needs of the tenant with the long-term financial health and legal obligations of the property owner. The best approach involves prioritizing the owner's interests and adhering strictly to the terms of the management agreement and Arizona law. This means obtaining explicit written consent from the owner for any proposed repairs that exceed a predefined threshold or involve a vendor with whom the manager has a pre-existing relationship. This approach ensures transparency, upholds the fiduciary duty owed to the owner, and complies with Arizona revised statutes, particularly those concerning the handling of client funds and the duty of loyalty. Obtaining written consent before incurring significant expenses or engaging potentially conflicted parties is a cornerstone of ethical property management. An approach that involves immediately approving the repair using the owner's funds without prior notification or consent is professionally unacceptable. This action violates the fiduciary duty to the owner by unilaterally expending their funds and bypasses the owner's right to approve significant expenditures. It also fails to disclose any potential conflicts of interest if the chosen vendor has a prior relationship with the property manager, which could be a violation of Arizona's agency laws and ethical standards. Another unacceptable approach is to delay the repair significantly due to the manager's personal preference for a different vendor. This prioritizes the manager's convenience or potential benefit over the tenant's right to a habitable dwelling and the owner's obligation to maintain the property. Such a delay could lead to further damage, increased costs, and potential legal liabilities for the owner, demonstrating a failure to act in the owner's best interest. Finally, an approach that involves informing the tenant that the owner is responsible for all repairs and that the manager has no authority to approve anything is also flawed. While the owner is ultimately responsible, the property manager has a contractual and legal obligation to manage the property effectively, which includes overseeing necessary repairs in a timely manner. This response abdicates the manager's responsibilities and creates unnecessary friction and delay, failing to provide the expected level of service. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the terms of the management agreement and relevant Arizona statutes. When faced with a repair request, the manager should assess its urgency and cost. For routine or minor repairs within an agreed-upon spending limit, the manager can proceed. For significant repairs or those involving potential conflicts of interest, the manager must consult the owner, provide all necessary information, and obtain written authorization before proceeding. Transparency, communication and adherence to legal and ethical obligations are paramount. Question 9. Upon reviewing the current real estate market in Phoenix, Arizona, a licensee observes a noticeable increase in property inventory and a slight slowdown in the rate of price appreciation compared to the previous year. Considering these observed market shifts, which of the following represents the most prudent and ethically sound approach for the licensee when advising a seller client who is considering listing their property? Option A. Recommend that the seller immediately reduce their asking price significantly to capitalize on any remaining buyer interest before the market potentially declines further, without providing specific data to support this aggressive recommendation. Option B. Present the seller with a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, that incorporates current inventory levels, average days on market, recent sales data, and projected absorption rates for the Phoenix area, explaining how these factors may influence pricing strategies and negotiation leverage in the current market cycle. Option C. Advise the seller that the market is still strong and that they should price their home at the higher end of their expectations, emphasizing that the slight slowdown is temporary and unlikely to significantly impact their sale price. Option D. Focus the discussion solely on the seller's desired sale price, assuring them that with effective marketing, their home will achieve their target price regardless of broader market conditions. The correct answer is B. Present the seller with a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, that incorporates current inventory levels, average days on market, recent sales data, and projected absorption rates for the Phoenix area, explaining how these factors may influence pricing strategies and negotiation leverage in the current market cycle. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must navigate the inherent volatility of real estate market cycles and trends, while upholding their fiduciary duties to clients and adhering to Arizona's specific real estate regulations. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting market conditions can lead to significant financial harm for clients and potential disciplinary action for the licensee. Careful judgment is required to provide accurate, unbiased advice that aligns with the client's best interests and the current economic realities of the Arizona market. The best approach involves a comprehensive analysis of current and historical market data specific to the relevant Arizona locality, coupled with an understanding of broader economic indicators that influence real estate. This includes examining factors such as inventory levels, average days on market, price appreciation/depreciation trends, interest rate movements, and local employment statistics. The licensee must then translate this data into actionable insights for the client, explaining how these trends might impact their specific transaction goals, whether buying or selling. This approach is correct because it is grounded in objective data and aligns with the Arizona Department of Real Estate's emphasis on licensee competence and ethical conduct, ensuring clients receive informed advice based on the realities of the Arizona real estate market. It fulfills the duty of care and loyalty by prioritizing the client's understanding and decision-making based on factual market conditions. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or past personal experiences without validating them with current market data. This fails to acknowledge the dynamic nature of real estate cycles and could lead to outdated or inaccurate advice, potentially causing a client to overpay for a property or undersell their own. This violates the duty of care and competence expected of a licensed professional in Arizona. Another incorrect approach is to present a biased outlook, either overly optimistic or pessimistic. Steer the client towards a particular decision that might benefit the licensee more than the client. This is unethical and violates the fiduciary duty of loyalty and good faith. Arizona regulations require licensees to act with honesty and integrity, and such manipulation of market information is a direct contravention of these principles. Furthermore, an incorrect approach would be to ignore or downplay significant negative market trends, such as a sharp increase in foreclosures or a sustained period of declining property values, simply to secure a commission. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to provide complete and accurate information, which is a violation of Arizona's real estate laws and ethical standards. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a commitment to continuous learning about market dynamics, a rigorous data-gathering methodology, and a client-centric communication style. Licensees should always prioritize objective analysis over subjective opinion, clearly articulate the implications of market trends for their clients, and be prepared to explain the rationale behind their advice, referencing credible data sources relevant to the Arizona market. Question 10. When evaluating the prorated property taxes for transaction closing on April 15, 2024 in Maricopa County, Arizona, if the total annual property tax for the property is $3,650, what is the correct amount of property tax the seller is responsible for, assuming the tax year runs from January 1 to December 31? Option A, $1,095.00. Option B, $1,000.00. Option C, $1,050.00. Option D, $1,100.00. The correct answer is C, $1,050.00. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Arizona to accurately calculate prorated property taxes, a common task that directly impacts the financial outcome of a real estate transaction. Miscalculations can lead to significant financial disputes between buyer and seller, potentially resulting in legal action and damage to the licensee's reputation and professional standing. Adherence to Arizona revised statutes and established real estate practices is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the prorated property taxes based on the exact number of days the seller will own the property in the tax year, and the buyer will own the property. This method ensures fairness by allocating the tax burden precisely according to ownership duration. In Arizona, property taxes are typically assessed annually and paid in arrears. The calculation should use the full calendar year, 365 days, or 366 in a leap year, as the denominator for the daily rate. The seller is responsible for the portion of the tax year up to, but not including, the closing date. The buyer is responsible from the closing date onwards. This aligns with standard Arizona real estate practices and ensures compliance with the principle of equitable apportionment of expenses. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply divide the annual tax by 12 and prorate based on months, ignoring the specific number of days in each month and the exact closing date. This is a significant oversimplification that leads to inaccuracies, as months have varying lengths. It fails to provide the precise allocation required by law and professional standards, potentially overcharging or undercharging one party. Another incorrect approach is to prorate based on the number of days the seller has owned the property in the current calendar year, without considering the full tax year. This fundamentally misunderstands how property taxes are assessed and prorated. Property taxes are an annual obligation, and the prorating must reflect the entire tax year, not just the period of the seller's ownership within that year. A third incorrect approach is to use a 360-day year for calculations, often referred to as a banker's year, or 30/360 convention. While this convention is used in some financial calculations, it is not appropriate for prorating property taxes in Arizona, which are based on actual calendar days. Using this method will result in an inaccurate daily tax rate and an incorrect final prorated amount, violating the principle of accurate financial apportionment. Professional reasoning. Real estate professionals in Arizona must prioritize accuracy and fairness in all financial calculations. When dealing with prorations, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the relevant tax period, usually the calendar year for property taxes. 2. Determining the total tax amount for that period. 3. Ascertaining the exact closing date. 4. Calculating the number of days the seller is responsible for and the number of days the buyer is responsible for within the tax year, using the actual number of days in the year, 365 or 366. 5. Applying the correct prorated amounts to each party based on their respective ownership days. Consulting the purchase agreement and relevant Arizona statutes or local assessor's office guidelines for specific proration methods is also crucial. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a real estate licensee in Arizona is assisting a first-time homebuyer who is struggling to qualify for a conventional mortgage due to a lower credit score and limited down payment. The licensee knows a mortgage broker who specializes in FHA, VA, and USDA loans and can likely secure approval for the buyer. However, the licensee also has a personal relationship with a developer who is offering a significant referral fee for any sales that utilize a specific, less common, government-backed loan program that the buyer might technically qualify for, though it has stricter property requirements. What is the most ethical and professionally responsible course of action for the licensee to take? Option A. Suggest to the buyer that they might be able to slightly inflate their reported income on the loan application to better meet the criteria for a conventional mortgage, which the licensee believes would be a better long-term option. Option B. Strongly encourage the buyer to pursue the less common government-backed loan program due to the attractive referral fee, emphasizing its potential benefits while downplaying the stricter property requirements. Option C. Fully disclose all potential government-backed loan options, including FHA, VA, and USDA loans. Explain the general eligibility and property requirements for each, and recommend the buyer consult with multiple qualified lenders specializing in these programs to determine the best fit for their specific financial situation and property preferences. Option D. Advise the buyer that an FHA loan is their only viable option and steer them towards the mortgage broker who can facilitate this, without mentioning other government-backed programs or the referral fee opportunity. Correct answer is C. Fully disclose all potential government-backed loan options, including FHA, VA, and USDA loans. Explain the general eligibility and property requirements for each, and recommend the buyer consult with multiple qualified lenders specializing in these programs to determine the best fit for their specific financial situation and property preferences. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a real estate licensee's duty to their client and the potential for personal gain. The licensee must navigate the complexities of government-backed loan programs, specifically FHA, VA, and USDA loans, while upholding their fiduciary responsibilities and adhering to Arizona revised statutes and relevant federal guidelines. The pressure to close a deal, coupled with the desire to assist a client who may be struggling with conventional financing, can create an environment where ethical boundaries are tested. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all advice and actions are in the client's best interest and comply with all applicable regulations. The approach that represents best professional practice involves thoroughly educating the client about all available loan options, including the specific requirements, benefits, and potential drawbacks of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, without steering them towards any particular program. This includes clearly explaining the eligibility criteria, down payment requirements, and any associated fees or mortgage insurance. The licensee should then empower the client to make an informed decision based on their individual financial situation and preferences, potentially recommending they consult with a qualified mortgage lender specializing in these government-backed programs. This approach is correct because it aligns with the licensee's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, promotes transparency, and ensures compliance with Arizona's real estate licensing laws, which mandate honest and fair dealing, as well as federal regulations governing these loan programs that prohibit discriminatory practices or steering. An incorrect approach involves strongly advocating for a specific government-backed loan program, such as an FHA loan, because the licensee has a pre-existing relationship with a lender who offers favorable terms for that particular loan type. This is professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes the licensee's or their associate's interest over the client's, potentially leading the client to choose a loan that is not the most suitable for their circumstances. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and could violate Arizona revised statutes regarding misrepresentation and dishonest dealings. Another incorrect approach involves downplaying the complexities or potential downsides of a government-backed loan, such as the appraisal requirements for VA loans or the property location restrictions for USDA loans, in an effort to expedite the transaction. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to provide the client with complete and accurate information, hindering their ability to make a fully informed decision. This lack of transparency can lead to significant issues later in the transaction or post-closing, and violates the ethical obligation to disclose all material facts. A further incorrect approach involves suggesting that the client can circumvent certain eligibility requirements for a government-backed loan, such as by misrepresenting their income or employment status. This is professionally unacceptable and illegal. It constitutes fraud and a violation of both state and federal laws governing mortgage lending and real estate transactions. Such actions not only jeopardize the client's loan approval, but also expose the licensee to severe disciplinary action, including license revocation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a commitment to client-centered service, prioritizing education and informed consent. Licensees should always ask themselves, am I providing all necessary information for my client to make the best decision for them? This involves understanding the nuances of various loan programs, being aware of potential conflicts of interest, and always acting with integrity and in accordance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. When in doubt, seeking guidance from a supervisor, legal counsel, or relevant regulatory bodies is always the prudent course of action. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a licensed real estate salesperson in Arizona has inadvertently allowed their required continuing education hours for the current renewal cycle to lapse, with the renewal deadline only 2 weeks away. The salesperson is concerned about the potential impact on their ability to continue practicing. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Renew the license as scheduled, intending to complete the outstanding continuing education hours shortly after the renewal date, assuming the department will be lenient. Option B. Contact the Arizona Department of Real Estate to inquire about a grace period or an alternative method to fulfill the continuing education requirement after the renewal deadline has passed. Option C. Seek out an online provider offering a guaranteed pass or expedited renewal service that bypasses standard continuing education verification for a fee. Option D. Immediately enroll in and complete the remaining required continuing education courses, ensuring all certificates of completion are obtained and ready for submission with the license renewal application. The correct answer is D. Immediately enroll in and complete the remaining required continuing education courses, ensuring all certificates of completion are obtained and ready for submission with the license renewal application. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to balance their obligation to their client with the strict requirements of Arizona's licensing laws regarding continuing education. The licensee's actions could inadvertently lead to a violation of Arizona revised statutes, impacting their ability to practice. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and maintain professional integrity. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying the lapse in continuing education and taking immediate corrective action to fulfill the requirement before the license renewal deadline. This demonstrates a commitment to adhering to Arizona's regulatory framework, specifically the Arizona Department of Real Estate's rules on license renewal and continuing education mandates. By completing the necessary hours and submitting proof, the licensee ensures their license remains active, and they avoid any penalties or disciplinary actions associated with noncompliance. This proactive stance aligns with the ethical duty to maintain professional competence and uphold the integrity of the real estate profession in Arizona. An approach that involves renewing the license without disclosing the incomplete continuing education hours is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This action constitutes a misrepresentation to the Arizona Department of Real Estate and violates the trust placed in licensees. It directly contravenes the spirit and letter of Arizona's continuing education requirements, which are designed to ensure licensees remain knowledgeable and up-to-date. Another unacceptable approach is to assume that the continuing education requirement can be fulfilled after the renewal date without consequence. This overlooks the explicit deadlines set by the Arizona Department of Real Estate for license renewal and the completion of continuing education. Such an assumption could lead to an inactive license status or even disciplinary action if discovered. Finally, attempting to find a loophole or an expedited, unofficial method to bypass the continuing education requirement is unprofessional and unethical. This demonstrates a disregard for the established regulatory processes and the importance of ongoing professional development mandated by Arizona law. Professionals should adopt a proactive approach to managing their licensing requirements. This involves maintaining a clear record of completed continuing education hours, understanding renewal deadlines, and addressing any deficiencies well in advance of the renewal date. When faced with a potential lapse, the professional decision-making process should prioritize direct communication with the licensing authority, the Arizona Department of Real Estate, and immediate action to rectify the situation in accordance with established regulations. Question 13. Implementation of a real estate brokerage policy in Arizona that allows for dual agency. What is the most critical step a licensed real estate salesperson must take when their brokerage represents both the seller of a property and a potential buyer interested in that same property? Option A. Act exclusively as the seller's agent and encourage the buyer to submit an offer without mentioning the brokerage representation of the seller. Option B. Obtain written informed consent from both the seller and the buyer after fully disclosing the nature of dual agency and its implications. Option C. Proceed with representing the buyer as a buyer's agent while negotiating for the seller, assuming the buyer will understand the agent's divided loyalties. Option D. Accept a commission from both the seller and the buyer without any specific disclosure beyond the standard agency disclosure form. The correct answer is B. Obtain written informed consent from both the seller and the buyer after fully disclosing the nature of dual agency and its implications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common yet ethically complex situation in Arizona real estate. The challenge lies in navigating the fiduciary duties owed to different parties when a brokerage represents both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. Missteps can lead to breaches of trust, legal liabilities, and violations of Arizona's real estate licensing laws and regulations, particularly concerning agency disclosure and duties. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties are treated fairly and transparently, and that the agent's actions align with their legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves full disclosure and obtaining informed consent from all parties involved. This means clearly explaining the nature of dual agency to both the seller and the buyer, detailing how the agent's loyalties will be divided, and outlining the limitations on the advice and advocacy the agent can provide to each party. Obtaining written consent for dual agency, as required by Arizona law, is paramount. This approach upholds the principles of transparency and informed consent, ensuring that both the seller and the buyer understand the implications of the arrangement and agree to proceed. It aligns with the Arizona Department of Real Estate's emphasis on clear agency disclosures and the prevention of undisclosed conflicts of interest. Incorrect approaches analysis. Representing the buyer as a buyer's agent while simultaneously negotiating on behalf of the seller without disclosing this dual agency relationship to either party is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty to both the seller, by not advocating solely for their best interests, and the buyer, by potentially withholding information or not providing full advocacy. Arizona law mandates disclosure of agency relationships. Acting solely as the seller's agent and attempting to persuade the buyer to make an offer without disclosing that the brokerage also represents the seller creates a conflict of interest and violates the buyer's right to expect an agent to represent their interests. This misrepresentation of agency status can lead to claims of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Accepting a commission from both the seller and the buyer without the explicit, informed written consent of both parties is a violation of Arizona's real estate regulations. While dual agency itself is permissible with consent, undisclosed dual compensation is unethical and illegal, as it suggests a hidden incentive that could compromise the agent's objectivity and fiduciary responsibilities to one or both parties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes transparency and informed consent in all agency relationships. When a potential conflict of interest arises, such as when a brokerage might represent both buyer and seller, the first step is to identify the potential conflict. The next step is to consult the relevant Arizona statutes and administrative rules governing agency relationships and disclosure requirements. If dual agency is contemplated, the professional must then clearly and comprehensively explain the implications to all parties, detailing the divided loyalties and limitations. Crucially, written consent must be obtained before proceeding. If informed consent cannot be obtained from all parties, or if the conflict is too significant to manage ethically, the professional should decline to represent one or both parties to avoid compromising their fiduciary duties and violating Arizona law. Question 14. To address the challenge of accurately valuing a standard single-family home in Phoenix, Arizona, for a seller who is not primarily concerned with rental income, which property valuation method would best reflect current market conditions and buyer preferences, thereby fulfilling the licensee's duty of competence and honesty as mandated by Arizona real estate regulations? Option A. cost approach. Option B, income approach. Option C, a combination of the income approach and the cost approach. Option D, comparative market analysis. The correct answer is D, comparative market analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee in Arizona must provide an accurate and defensible valuation to their client, adhering to both ethical standards and Arizona Department of Real Estate (ASDR) regulations. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate valuation method given the specific characteristics of the property and the market, ensuring the advice provided is not misleading and upholds the fiduciary duty owed to the client. Misrepresenting the property's value can lead to significant financial harm for the client and potential disciplinary action for the licensee. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis. This method is best suited for residential properties, especially when there are numerous comparable sales in the immediate vicinity. It involves analyzing recent sales of similar properties, adjusting for differences in features, location, and condition, to arrive at an estimated market value. Arizona real estate licensees are ethically and regulatorily obligated to provide clients with accurate and informed advice. ASDA Rule R4-28-1101 A requires licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, which includes using appropriate valuation methods. A comparative market analysis, when performed diligently and with accurate data, directly reflects current market conditions and buyer behavior for similar properties, making it the most reliable indicator of market value for a typical single-family home. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading for a single-family residence not primarily purchased for investment income. This method is designed for income-producing properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, where rental income is the primary driver of value. Applying it to a single-family home would require making speculative assumptions about potential rental income and vacancy rates, which are not the primary considerations for most owner-occupant buyers. This failure to use a relevant valuation method violates the duty of competence and could lead to an inaccurate valuation, misleading the client. The cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property, less depreciation, is generally most effective for newer construction or unique properties where comparable sales are scarce. For a typical single-family home with a history of recent sales, it is often less accurate than the comparative market analysis. The calculation of depreciation can be subjective, and it doesn't directly reflect what a buyer is willing to pay in the current market. Relying solely on this method for a standard residential property could result in a valuation that is not aligned with market realities, failing to meet the standard of care expected of an Arizona licensee. Professionals should approach valuation by first understanding the property type and its primary market. For a standard residential property in Arizona, the comparative market analysis is the default and most reliable method. If the property has unique characteristics or is an income-producing asset, then the income or cost approaches might be considered, often in conjunction with the comparative market analysis, but never as a sole method for a typical home. The decision-making process involves gathering all relevant data, understanding the purpose of the valuation, and selecting the methods that best reflect current market conditions and the property's intended use, always prioritizing accuracy and client best interests in accordance with ASDA regulations. Question 15. Examination of the data shows that a client is considering two distinct real estate investment opportunities in Arizona. One is a single-family home in a growing suburban area with strong rental demand, and the other is a small commercial property in a revitalizing downtown district with potential for significant long-term capital growth. Which approach best assists the client in making an informed decision? Option A detailed projection of immediate rental income for both properties, emphasizing the higher yield of the single-family home. Option B, a summary of the tax advantages associated with owning investment real estate in Arizona without detailing specific property costs or risks. Option C, an emphasis on the potential for rapid capital appreciation of the downtown commercial property, citing recent market activity. Option D, a comparative analysis that evaluates the potential for rental income, property appreciation, market trends, and the client's risk tolerance for each property. The correct answer is D, a comparative analysis that evaluates the potential for rental income, property appreciation, market trends, and the client's risk tolerance for each property. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Arizona to advise a client on investment potential without resorting to purely mathematical calculations, which could be misleading or incomplete on their own. The salesperson must demonstrate an understanding of how different investment strategies compare in the context of the Arizona real estate market, considering factors beyond simple returns. Careful judgment is required to present a balanced and informative comparison that aligns with ethical obligations and Arizona revised statutes governing real estate transactions. The best approach involves a comparative analysis that considers multiple facets of investment performance beyond just immediate financial returns. This includes evaluating the potential for appreciation, rental income generation, market trends specific to Arizona, and the client's individual risk tolerance and investment goals. This method is correct because it provides a holistic view, enabling the client to make a more informed decision based on a broader understanding of the investment's potential and risks. This aligns with the Arizona revised statutes, which require licensees to exercise reasonable care and diligence, and to present a true picture in advertising and representations, implying a duty to provide comprehensive and balanced information to clients. An approach that focuses solely on projected rental yields without considering vacancy rates, maintenance costs, or long-term market appreciation is incorrect. This fails to meet the standard of care required by Arizona law, as it presents an incomplete and potentially misleading picture of the investment's viability, could lead a client to make an investment based on an inflated expectation of income. Another incorrect approach is to emphasize only the potential for rapid price appreciation based on anecdotal evidence or recent market surges. This ignores the inherent volatility of real estate markets and the possibility of market corrections, failing to provide a balanced risk assessment. Such a focus could violate the duty to act with honesty and integrity, as it prioritizes a speculative outcome over a prudent evaluation. Finally, an approach that solely highlights the tax benefits of real estate investment without discussing the associated liabilities, such as property taxes, insurance, and potential capital gains tax upon sale, is also professionally unacceptable. This selective presentation of information can lead to a client underestimating the total cost of ownership and the overall financial commitment, thereby failing to uphold the fiduciary duty of full disclosure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves understanding the client's objectives, thoroughly researching the market, and presenting a balanced analysis of various investment options, including their potential benefits and risks, in a clear and understandable manner. The focus should always be on empowering the client to make a decision that aligns with their financial situation and risk appetite, adhering strictly to Arizona's real estate regulations and ethical guidelines. Question 16. Research into the Arizona real estate market indicates that a prospective buyer expresses a desire to purchase a luxury condominium in Scottsdale with a budget of $300,000. What is the most prudent initial course of action for an Arizona licensed real estate salesperson? Option A. Immediately begin searching for and scheduling showings of luxury condominiums in Scottsdale that fit the buyer's stated budget. Option B. Advise the buyer that their budget is likely insufficient for luxury condominiums in Scottsdale and suggest they look at properties in less affluent areas. Option C. Discuss current Scottsdale condominium market conditions, including typical price ranges for luxury properties, and inquire about the buyer's pre-approval status for financing. Option D. Agree to show the buyer luxury condominiums in Scottsdale within their budget, assuming they will find a way to secure additional financing if needed. The correct answer is C. Discuss current Scottsdale condominium market conditions, including typical price ranges for luxury properties, and inquire about the buyer's pre-approval status for financing. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson to navigate a situation where a potential client's stated intent might conflict with their actual financial capacity or understanding of the market, potentially leading to wasted effort, ethical breaches, or legal complications. Careful judgment is required to balance client service with realistic expectations and adherence to Arizona revised statutes governing real estate transactions. The best professional approach involves proactively educating the client about the current market realities in Arizona, including typical price ranges for properties matching their desires, the general availability of such properties, and the essential steps in the home buying process. This includes discussing the importance of pre-approval for financing early in the search. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Arizona Department of Real Estate's emphasis on honesty, integrity, and competence. By providing realistic market information and guiding the client through the necessary preliminary steps, the salesperson fulfills their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, preventing them from pursuing a potentially fruitless or misleading search. It also upholds the principle of avoiding misrepresentation by not allowing the client to proceed under false pretenses about their purchasing power. An incorrect approach involves immediately beginning an extensive property search based solely on the client's initial, potentially unrealistic, wish list without any preliminary discussion of their financial qualifications or the current Arizona market conditions. This is professionally unacceptable because it wastes both the client's and the salesperson's time and resources. It also risks creating false hope and could lead to disappointment if the client is unable to secure financing for the properties they view, potentially violating ethical obligations to be truthful and avoid misleading clients. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with showing properties that are significantly above the client's stated budget, assuming they might be able to stretch their finances or that their budget is negotiable. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards the client's explicit financial limitations and could be seen as an attempt to push a sale without genuine regard for the client's affordability. It fails to uphold the duty of loyalty and care by not prioritizing the client's financial well-being, and could lead to a transaction that the client cannot sustain. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's interest outright due to a perceived mismatch between their stated desires and their initial financial information, without attempting to educate them or explore potential alternatives. This is professionally unacceptable because it can be perceived as poor customer service and a failure to explore all reasonable avenues to assist the client. While managing expectations is crucial, a complete dismissal without any attempt at guidance or explanation can be seen as unprofessional and may violate the spirit of assisting consumers in their real estate endeavors within the bounds of Arizona law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and realistic expectation setting from the outset. This involves active listening to understand the client's goals, followed by a transparent discussion of market conditions, financing realities, and the practical steps involved in a real estate transaction in Arizona. This proactive and informative approach ensures that both parties are aligned in working towards achievable objectives, thereby upholding ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Question 17. Which approach would be most effective for an Arizona real estate salesperson to explain the definition and importance of real estate to a prospective client who has limited prior knowledge of the subject? Option A. Characterize real estate mainly as a speculative investment, highlighting its potential for rapid price appreciation and the risks associated with market fluctuations. Option B. Emphasize real estate as a tangible asset with intrinsic value, a significant component of personal wealth and investment portfolios, and a driver of economic activity through development, construction, and related industries. Option C. Focus primarily on the transactional aspects, such as the steps involved in buying and selling property and the typical commission structures for agents. Option D. Define real estate solely in terms of its legal description, property boundaries, and the rights and responsibilities associated with ownership. The correct answer is B. Emphasize real estate as a tangible asset with intrinsic value, a significant component of personal wealth and investment portfolios, and a driver of economic activity through development, construction, and related industries. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Arizona to understand the fundamental definition and importance of real estate beyond mere property transactions. It tests their ability to articulate the broader economic and societal significance of real estate, which is crucial for client education, ethical practice, and demonstrating professional competence. A deep understanding ensures that advice provided to clients is well-rounded and considers factors beyond immediate sale price. The best approach involves a comprehensive explanation that highlights real estate as a tangible asset with intrinsic value, a significant component of personal wealth and investment portfolios, and a driver of economic activity through development, construction, and related industries. This approach is correct because it aligns with the foundational principles of real estate as taught in licensing courses, and emphasized by the Arizona Department of Real Estate's mandate for licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence. It underscores the importance of real estate as a stable store of value and a critical element in economic growth, providing a robust understanding for clients. An approach that focuses solely on the transactional aspects, such as the mechanics of buying and selling or the commission earned, is incorrect. This fails to address the fundamental definition and importance of real estate as an asset class and economic driver. It represents a superficial understanding that could lead to advising clients based only on short-term gains or market fluctuations, neglecting the long-term value and broader economic impact. Another incorrect approach would be to define real estate only in terms of its legal description and ownership rights. Legal aspects are vital. This definition is incomplete. It omits the economic, social, and investment dimensions that contribute significantly to the importance of real estate. This narrow focus fails to equip a salesperson to discuss the full spectrum of benefits and considerations associated with real estate ownership and investment. Finally, an approach that emphasizes real estate primarily as a speculative investment, subject to rapid price changes and market volatility, is also professionally deficient. While speculation can be a component of real estate investment, it is not its sole or defining characteristic. This perspective can lead to misrepresenting the inherent stability and long-term wealth-building potential of real estate, potentially exposing clients to undue risk. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a holistic understanding of real estate. This involves continuously reinforcing foundational knowledge, considering the economic and societal implications of property, and using this comprehensive understanding to provide informed and ethical guidance to clients, thereby fulfilling their fiduciary duties and upholding professional standards as mandated by Arizona real estate law. Question 18. The efficiency study reveals a significant increase in interest rates and a slowdown in new residential construction within the Phoenix metropolitan area. Considering these economic factors and the regulatory framework of Arizona, which approach best equips a real estate salesperson to advise clients on current market conditions? Option A. Focus primarily on historical sales data from the past 5 years to establish property valuation, assuming past trends will continue. Option B. Dismiss the impact of interest rate hikes and construction slowdowns as temporary, continuing to market properties based on previous market conditions. Option C. Analyze how rising interest rates and reduced construction directly impact property values, buyer affordability, and seller expectations within specific Arizona market segments, and use this to provide tailored advice. Option D. Rely solely on general national economic trends to inform advice, without specific analysis of the Phoenix metropolitan area's unique market dynamics. The correct answer is C. Analyze how rising interest rates and reduced construction directly impact property values, buyer affordability, and seller expectations within specific Arizona market segments, and use this to provide tailored advice. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a significant shift in the Phoenix metropolitan area's real estate market, characterized by a notable increase in interest rates and a corresponding slowdown in new residential construction. A real estate salesperson operating in Arizona must navigate this evolving economic landscape to effectively advise clients. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting these macroeconomic indicators and translating them into actionable, client-specific advice that aligns with Arizona's real estate regulations and ethical standards. Misinterpreting these factors could lead to poor investment decisions for clients, damage the salesperson's reputation, and potentially violate Arizona revised statutes, Rs, concerning fair dealing and competent representation. The most effective approach involves a comprehensive analysis of how the rising interest rates and reduced construction directly impact property values, buyer affordability, and seller expectations within the specific Arizona market segments. This includes understanding the ripple effects on demand for existing homes, the potential for price adjustments, and the feasibility of new developments. By synthesizing this information, the salesperson can provide nuanced guidance on pricing strategies, negotiation tactics, and market timing, ensuring clients make informed decisions based on current economic realities and regulatory compliance. This aligns with ARS Section 32-2154, which mandates that licensees act with reasonable care and competence, and R Section 32-2155, which requires licensees to avoid misrepresentation and to deal honestly with all parties. An approach that focuses solely on historical sales data without accounting for the current economic headwinds is problematic. While historical data provides context, it fails to reflect the immediate impact of rising interest rates on buyer purchasing power and the reduced supply from slower construction, potentially leading to outdated pricing recommendations and unrealistic client expectations. This could be seen as a failure to exercise reasonable care and competence under ARS Section 32-2154. Another less effective approach would be to dismiss the impact of interest rate hikes and construction slowdowns as temporary fluctuations, continuing to market properties based on previous market conditions. This ignores the substantial influence of these economic factors on current market dynamics and buyer behavior in Arizona. Such a stance could lead to clients overpaying for properties or missing opportunities due to a lack of timely and accurate market analysis, potentially violating the duty of honesty and fair dealing under ARS Section 32-2155. Furthermore, an approach that relies exclusively on general national economic trends, without specific analysis of the Phoenix metropolitan area's unique market conditions, is insufficient. While national trends provide a backdrop, local economic factors, demographic shifts, and specific supply-demand dynamics within Arizona are critical for providing relevant and accurate advice. Failing to tailor advice to the local market demonstrates a lack of specialized knowledge and competence required of an Arizona real estate licensee. The professional reasoning process should involve a continuous cycle of data gathering, economic analysis, market interpretation, and client consultation. Salespersons must actively monitor economic indicators relevant to the Arizona real estate market, understand their implications, and then communicate this analysis clearly and ethically to clients, tailoring advice to individual circumstances and regulatory requirements. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that a seller in Arizona, who has signed an exclusive right to sell listing agreement with your brokerage, has expressed a desire to try and find a buyer themselves for the next 2 weeks before you actively market the property. The seller explicitly stated that if they find a buyer during this period, they do not want to pay your brokerage any commission. How should you, as a licensed real estate salesperson in Arizona, ethically and legally respond to this seller's request? Option A. Advise the seller that they are free to sell the property to whomever they wish during this period without any commission obligation, as they are making the effort to find the buyer. Option B. Immediately terminate the listing agreement to avoid potential conflict without fully explaining the commission implications to the seller. Option C. Explain to the seller the terms of the exclusive right to sell agreement, emphasizing that a commission is due to the brokerage if the property sells during the listing period, regardless of who procures the buyer, and advise them that attempting to circumvent this would be a breach of contract. Option D. Agree to the seller's request to unofficially hold off on marketing for 2 weeks, with the understanding that if they find a buyer, no commission will be owed, to maintain a good client relationship. The correct answer is C. Explain to the seller the terms of the exclusive right to sell agreement, emphasizing that a commission is due to the brokerage if the property sells during the listing period, regardless of who procures the buyer, and advise them that attempting to circumvent this would be a breach of contract. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a situation where a seller's stated intentions conflict with the terms of a signed listing agreement, potentially leading to ethical breaches and legal repercussions under Arizona law. The licensee must balance their fiduciary duty to the seller with the contractual obligations established in the listing agreement. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation, breach of contract, and damage to the licensee's reputation and license. The best professional approach involves clearly and unequivocally explaining to the seller the terms of the existing exclusive right to sell agreement and the implications of their request. This includes reiterating that the agreement obligates the seller to pay a commission to the brokerage if the property sells during the listing period, regardless of who procures the buyer. The licensee should then advise the seller that attempting to sell the property independently and avoid paying the agreed-upon commission would constitute a breach of contract and could lead to legal action by the brokerage. This approach upholds the licensee's duty of honesty and full disclosure to the client, adheres to the contractual obligations of the exclusive right to sell agreement as governed by Arizona real estate regulations, and protects the brokerage's earned commission. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the seller's request to unofficially hold off on marketing the property while they try to find a buyer themselves, with the understanding that if they find one, they won't owe a commission. This is ethically problematic as it constitutes tacit agreement to circumvent the terms of the exclusive right to sell agreement, potentially misrepresenting the situation to the seller and failing to uphold the brokerage's contractual rights. It also risks violating Arizona's licensing laws regarding honest and ethical conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the listing agreement without proper consultation or explanation to the seller about the commission implications. While termination might seem like a solution, doing so without clearly explaining the seller's contractual obligations and potential liabilities under the exclusive right to sell agreement is a disservice to the client and could be seen as an attempt to avoid a difficult conversation, rather than professionally managing the situation. Finally, advising the seller that they are free to sell the property to whomever they wish without any commission obligation, despite the existing exclusive right to sell agreement, is a direct violation of contract law and Arizona real estate regulations. This misrepresents the legal standing of the agreement and exposes both the seller and the licensee to significant legal and disciplinary consequences. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing clear communication, thorough understanding of contractual obligations, and adherence to ethical and legal standards. This involves educating the client about their commitments, explaining the consequences of deviating from those commitments, and offering solutions that are compliant with all applicable laws and ethical guidelines. When faced with a client's desire to act contrary to a signed agreement, the professional's role is to guide them through the implications and ensure all actions are legally sound and ethically defensible. Question 20. The control framework reveals that a real estate agent in Scottsdale, Arizona, is representing a seller whose property is zoned R1-8, single-family residential, 8,000 square foot minimum lot size. The seller wishes to sell the property quickly and mentions to the agent that they believe a buyer could easily subdivide the lot into two smaller lots, each with a 4,000 square foot minimum, for a higher profit. The agent knows that the R1-8 zoning designation in Scottsdale strictly prohibits lot splits that result in parcels smaller than the minimum lot size. The agent also knows that the seller is eager to accept an offer below market value if it closes within 30 days. What is the most ethical and legally compliant course of action for the agent? Option A. Inform the buyer that the property is zoned R1-8 and that while lot splits are generally discouraged, it's a common practice in the area to achieve them with minimal effort, and that they should investigate further if it's a priority. Option B. Proceed with marketing the property and accepting an offer based on the seller's belief that subdivision is possible, without independently verifying the zoning regulations or informing the buyer of the strict lot size requirements. Option C. Inform the potential buyer that the property is zoned R1-8 and that Scottsdale zoning regulations prohibit lot splits resulting in parcels smaller than 8,000 square feet, and advise them to consult with the City of Scottsdale Planning Department for definitive information regarding subdivision possibilities. Option D. Advise the seller that while the R1-8 zoning has an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size, they can likely get a variance to subdivide the property into two 4,000 square foot lots, encouraging the seller to market the property based on this potential. The correct answer is C. Inform the potential buyer that the property is zoned R1-8 and that Scottsdale zoning regulations prohibit lot splits resulting in parcels smaller than 8,000 square feet, and advise them to consult with the City of Scottsdale Planning Department for definitive information regarding subdivision possibilities. Explanation. The control framework reveals that real estate professionals in Arizona must navigate complex zoning laws and land use regulations to ensure ethical and legal transactions. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a seller's desire for a quick sale with the legal obligations to disclose material facts that could impact the buyer's use and enjoyment of the property. Misrepresenting or omitting information about zoning restrictions can lead to significant legal repercussions for the agent and the seller, and erode buyer trust. Careful judgment is required to identify the relevant regulations and communicate them accurately. The best professional approach involves proactively investigating and disclosing all known zoning restrictions that materially affect the property's intended use. This includes understanding the specific zoning classification of the property and any associated development standards or limitations. By conducting due diligence and providing this information upfront, the agent fulfills their fiduciary duty to the buyer and adheres to Arizona revised statutes concerning disclosure and fair dealing. This approach prioritizes transparency and protects all parties involved from potential future disputes. An incorrect approach would be to assume the buyer is aware of or will discover the zoning restrictions on their own. This fails to meet the agent's obligation to disclose material facts and could be construed as a misrepresentation by omission. Another incorrect approach is to downplay or dismiss the significance of the zoning restrictions to facilitate the sale. This is unethical and potentially illegal, as it misleads the buyer about the property's true limitations. Finally, relying solely on the seller's verbal assurances without independent verification of zoning regulations is also a flawed strategy, as the agent has a duty to ensure the accuracy of information provided to buyers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all potential material facts, including zoning and land use regulations, that could influence a buyer's decision. This requires a thorough understanding of local ordinances and state laws. Next, the agent must verify the accuracy of this information through official sources. Finally, all material information must be communicated clearly and promptly to the buyer, ideally in writing, to ensure full disclosure and compliance with ethical and legal standards.